May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. Welcome to another Cuke Audio podcast. We have a guest today. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable, free from economic struggle, and able to get out and do whatever it is you want within the limitations of the universal precept of do as little harm as possible. So after our pause to meditate, we'll call up Jeff Broadbent. Now, we had a long podcast with him a while back, and then a couple of weeks ago, we did one with him where he talked about his first wife, Taihaku Priest, who passed away recently, and had that Zendo in Vermont with the Chinese name Shaoshan or something like that. And today we're going to talk to Jeff about climate change. He as a sociology professor and scientist, he has been involved with the environment since he first started back in the 70s. And anyway, well, we get into his history with it a little bit. And this came about because he wrote a paper, and I'm going to post his paper on Cuke.com. And I'll link to it from What's New, or you can go to Cuke.com and just write Jeff Broadbent or Broadbent in the site search box, and it'll go to it. Jeff was an early Suzuki student, and he went to Japan. We'll call him up right after the pause to meditate. So when you hear the bell, hit pause. Meditate or not for as long as you wish. And when you're ready to come back, hit unpause, and we'll be here to hit the bell to end the meditation or not, and give Jeff a call. What's the name of your paper first?
I'd call it Global Environmental Sociology, which it's coming out in the sociology, publication, so I call it that. But Global Environment and Society could be an easier, less jargony term.
Yeah, I think that would turn fewer people away.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Right.
so you can say anything. I really wanted to have a podcast with you, reading whatever you want from that and talking about it. And because I liked the presentation, it was a very complete presentation of the situation. I thought you covered a lot of bases, looked at it from a lot of angles, and especially from the point of view of what can be done. So there's some optimism in there. I tend to be pessimistic. I just think we don't show any inclination to deal with it. We're doomed. So
yeah, well, it is tending in that direction, but at some point people may wake up.
Yeah, yeah. The one problem with that is it's got a different type of, I don't know, if you drew it on a graph, it's got the point of wake up on some things. You got a lot of time to deal with it because the
Right.
consequences are coming so far in the future. But the point of wake up
Yeah.
on this really has to be before the bad consequences start in because they start, you know, what do you? They have an additive effect.
Yeah. Right.
So anyway,
Yeah.
but so go on. You
Well,
don't let me talk
I
anymore.
mean, no, please. You're mentioning before in our previous conversation that our John Kerry was out there talking about climate change as an existential problem was really, turning people off and not a good way of messaging it. And
Well, I think
you
all he needs to say when they say it's an existential threat to really get to more people, all they need to do is define that. That means it's threatening your existence and your
yeah, right.
future existence and the future existence of your children. You know what I mean? It's got
Yeah,
saying exit, and people say, "Oh, people understand that," and I'll say, "Well, I don't. I hear existential threat,
yeah.
and I just go, oh, existential threat. I don't.
I think of
You know
Camus
what I
and
mean?
Sartre and, you know, yeah,
I have to. I have to. If I stop, I go existential threat. Let's see. What does that mean? Oh, it means a threat to our
yeah,
existence.
yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And anyway,
So that helped me think about it. And I do mention that, in there.
yeah, I noticed. I noticed.
Yeah,
I appreciated it. I think that's all it needs.
yeah.
Uh,
But I wrote it in response to a request from this sociology publication. They're having a special show on the environment. And they asked if I'd write something, so I wrote it and tried to encompass it from a global level and sketch out for those few who don't still know, what the nature of the problem is in terms of climate change and other forms of environmental transgressions of the planetary safe operating limits. And then I tried to briefly get into some of the reasons that we're going on like lemmings heading towards a cliff without stopping to, look around and say, hey, what's going on? And let's change direction here. At least not enough people are stopping and doing that. And therefore our governments are, particularly in the U.S., are not doing enough to change course, to reduce carbon dioxide emissions and other kinds of fossil fuel burning around the world and in the U.S., to head off this disaster.
yeah.
Yeah, so, are we just creatures of habit, or are we driven by fear, or just feeling overwhelmed and don't want to admit to it? So, a lot of people are concerned, of course, and the level of concern has been rising steadily in the United States. The United States is the country that really needs to take bold action if the rest of the world is going to do something. And, some of the countries like Germany and the UK have already taken some considerable action, and reduced their carbon emissions. But the U.S. is the one that really needs to take the lead, and that's where we have these strong conservative forces that are fighting against it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Indeed. The word conservative there really, what does that mean? They're not conservative.
No, not really. They're not conserving the planet.
Right. What are they conserving? Their assumptions are
Yeah.
their short-term profit or,
Yeah, or their assumptions about, they want to live in a world that's stable and protected, and I suppose run by white people, and
That's the key. That's the key. Yeah, pardon me.
yeah, no, I think it's got a lot to do with it.
That's one of the big things in the way. And, 538, looking at, studies of what's the key driver behind, that sort of politics in America. You hear all sorts of people say, well, reasons. They say race, white, people or white feel like they're losing their white identity, the white place in the world.
Yeah, yeah, and there's some truth to it too.
Yeah. Well, it's resistance to change. It's just resistance to, seeing one's what, being white means. It doesn't have to mean that much.
Yeah.
Making too big a
No,
deal
it doesn't
out
have
of it.
to. Yeah, that's what they are. Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
This idea of whiteness.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just told Katrinka last night. I told her a couple of stories about my best friend, my oldest friend. We were like brothers, Ward, and I'd stay over at his grandparents' house. His grandparents raised him a lot of the time. And let's see, at about the age of, 14 or 15 or something, we were in the car with them. And I don't remember why I said something about that lady crossing the street up ahead. And his grandparents were in the front, and his grandmother said, I don't see a lady. I said, yeah, right there, And then Ward was elbowing me. I didn't know why. And then finally I realized to her it wasn't a lady, it was a woman because she was black.
Oh, I see. A lady was a term of respect, huh?
Yeah, to her only white women were ladies.
I see.
And she was she wasn't a bad person. That was just her worldview. It was very, very dominant. Coming, and not where I grew up, not at the time that I grew up. That was fading away in Texas, where I was in the suburbs, Fort Worth. But it was in the background of people's thinking, and it takes time to evolve away from that.
Yeah.
So, all right, enough of that. So go on about your paper.
Well, I mean, I could explain it, or I could read it, or what?
You have your choice. I mean, yeah, it's up to you. You're a college professor, a retired one. It's true, but so you're in charge. I mean, pretend I'm your class, and you got 30 minutes.
Oh, okay. Well, I can do that in 30 minutes. I could just read it, and with proper expression and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Global environment and society. The space probe Cassini, passing the rings of Saturn, turned its camera on the Earth. The photo captured a barely visible pale blue dot floating in inky blackness. As Carl Sagan says in his book of the name, Pale Blue Dot, all the heroes and villains, saints and sinners, warriors and peacemakers of our global human history have played out on this dot. This tiny ball of stone, wrapped in land, water, and air, graced by a thin mantle of life. In the near infinite expanse of the universe, many other living worlds no doubt exist. but they are so far away that even the light of their stars takes many years to reach us. Faster than light travel and wormholes in space, allowing rapid transport to other worlds, will always remain in the realm of science fiction. In reality, we are stuck here on our lonely planet and need to make the best of it. Over the past billions of years, our planet has nurtured the evolution of a marvelous array of plants and animals, including humans. Since 10,000 years ago, in the stable climate of the Holocene, humans have gradually prospered. In the last 200 years, though, our inventive genius, expressed in science and technology, has vastly accelerated the pace of improvement. Despite all the evils, wars, colonialism, exploitation, dictatorship, inequality, discrimination, genocide, paranoia, the benefits have become increasingly available around the world, as Steven Pinker points out in Enlightenment Now. As a result, average global life expectancy has grown rapidly, from 32 years in 1900 to 71.4 years in 2014. Average education has increased greatly. For instance, China went from 1.4% primary school enrollment in 1900 to 100% in 2015. In the same period, India went from 7% to 100%. Average global UN Human Development Index, which varies from 0 to 1, based on longevity, education, and standard of living, increased greatly. For instance, India went from HDI 0.04 in 1900.
Wait a minute, what's
to
HDI again?
The Human Development Index.
Oh, yeah, right. So what does that mean?
Human Development Index. That's based, it's compounded from how long people live, how much education they get, and their income.
They're like quality of life.
It's a quality of life index, yeah.
Yeah. Right.
And so, and it varies from 0 to 1.
Yeah. That's far out. It varies
Yeah.
from that. Yeah. All right. Go on.
That's how they measure it, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Same
India
thing
went
as
from
saying 1 to
HDI
100.
Yeah, it is, yeah. Except
I mean,
just put
0
the
to
decimals in
100.
a different place.
Right. It's decimal points.
Yeah. Yeah. So, for instance, India went from 0.04 in 1900 to 0.38 in 2015. So it increased its quality of life by about 9 times or so. And in the same period, China went from 0.04 to 0.54. So it increased its quality of life by about 12 times.
Mm.
And the U.S. went from 0.28 to 0.78, so it increased its quality of life by about 3 times. And electronic communications are weaving a more unified world. So on balance, the general human condition has improved dramatically. And with intelligent cooperation, we can do much more. Unfortunately, the light of progress has cast a lengthening shadow. We thought the Earth's bounty to be endless, created by God for human use, with human impact negligible. However, we are discovering that our planet has limits. Our planet is a closed ecological system. Under normal conditions, in its ecological metabolism, the wastes produced by one species become the food for another, in an endless loop. However, humans have messed with this natural equilibrium. Our scientific and technological genius lets us dump natural chemicals like carbon dioxide in quantities so vast as to overload the natural absorptive capacity, and to dump invented chemicals like plastics that don't break down in amounts so huge as to degrade the oceans and trap fish and birds. We are fishing out the seas and cutting down the rainforests to make way for giant cattle pastures and palm oil plantations. In sum, we are overshooting the carrying capacity and exceeding the safe operating limits of the planetary ecosystem. Among our transgressions of planetary limits, we are driving vast numbers of plant and animal species into extinction, depleting the stratospheric ozone layer that protects our planet from harsh solar radiation, and disrupting the stability of the climate, as John Foley points out in the Scientific American, April 2010. In short, we are destroying the very ecological systems that gave us birth and continue to be vital for our existence. In his book, Storms of My Grandchildren, 2009, James Hansen, a leading climate scientist, worries we could eventually render our planet too hot to support human and other biotic life, as on Venus. Thus, climate change is a, quote, existential, unquote, problem for humanity in that it threatens our very existence. But the situation is also existential in the philosophical sense. Its solution demands that we rethink our very identities and purposes in being alive. How can we get out of this trap? Can human society, like Houdini, miraculously extricate itself from intensifying ecological destruction? Like Charlie Chaplin in his film Modern Times, can we reverse the grinding gears to spit us out back into safety? Can we go back to a pre-industrial village life, living without electricity on locally grown organic food? I did this at times in the 1960s and 1970s, but got bored and wanted to feel the joy of joining the larger social currents. Nor did I want to spend my life doing manual labor. So I complete. Yeah, it's very true. After Tassajara, I was working as a laborer for the carpentry crews in San Francisco. And that led to the epiphany that I didn't want to do that the rest of my life.
Yeah. Or do it on the side, work on your own home.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pardon me.
So,
go on. It's good.
No,
It's good.
yeah.
It's all very clear. This is all very clear.
So I completed my PhD and became a professor of sociology. Such yearning is common around the world. As the old song goes, how are you going to keep them down on the farm after they've seen Paris? In the developed world, most people are embedded in an electrified, commodified, globalized lifestyle. Throughout the developing world, at their first chance, young people flock to cities, watch Western sitcoms on TV, grab smartphones, and surf the internet. They hope for something new and different. So on the mass scale, we have little hope of going backward. We must then plunge forward. If we are to survive and thrive in the long run, we must comprehend our present global realities and apply our genius to create a sustainable global society and a sustainable global ecosystem. Just comprehending our current global reality, though, not to speak of transforming it, presents a daunting task. We can understand our global material reality by studying the material flows of its socio-ecological systems through extraction of resources, production of stuff, consumption of stuff, and throwing out waste. These flows impact on and degrade the physical environment. Comprehending our global social reality, however, is far more complex. This requires studying the many factors that drive our increasing material throughput and produce the barriers that divide us into unequal and hostile groupings around the planet. The better we can comprehend both the material flows and the social driving factors, the greater chance we will have of transforming them and learning to cooperate for the greater long-term good. In fostering this double comprehension and in finding ways to change, the physical and the socio-psychological sciences, along with practitioners, inventors, entrepreneurs, politicians, activists, artists, and others, can all make crucial contributions. Population ecology, for example, connects to social and physical sciences. Among its practitioners, Paul Ehrlich and Holdren, in dialogue with Barry Commoner, first introduced the IPAT formula, IPAT, in 1972. This formula tells us that our material impact, I, on the physical environment, is a function of the size of the population, P, how much stuff each person buys and consumes per capita, A for affluence, and the amount of pollution emitted by the technology used to make the stuff, T. On the global scale, over the past 100 years, the factors of the IPAT formula have seen rapid, enormous growth. The human global population, P, grew 400%, from 1.85 billion in 1900 to 7.8 billion in 2020. Now the global growth rate is leveling off with estimates for 2100 from 9 to 11 billion people. During the same period, the global average gross domestic product, or wealth per capita, increased 700%, from an average income of $2,212 in 1900 to $15,212 in 2018. That's 4 times as many people, each consuming 7 times as much stuff. A 28-fold increase in environmental impact if technology stayed the same. However, since 1900, polluting technologies such as burning coal to run electrical generating plants have spread around the world, and new productive technologies based on burning oil and new inventions of synthetic chemicals for innumerable uses entered after World War II. Electrical generation by fossil fuel combustion increased from 40,000 terawatt hours in 1965 to 137,000 terawatt hours in 2019, or almost 4 times. Metals production went up about 50 times, from 9 million metric tons in 1900 to 438 million metric tons in 2013. This growth has had massive impact on the global environment. In terms of the global ecological footprint, or environmental taking and wasting, in 1970, the planet as a whole passed into ecological deficit. This means that from 1970 on, it was taking more than a single planet's worth of resources and waste disposal areas to support the human lifestyle. This has resulted in a progressive worsening of the environment. The human effect on the planetary ecosystem has become so large as to earn the present era a new label, the Anthropocene, instead of the Holocene. However, the planetary ecosystem can only sustainably support a global population of about 2.2 billion, less than 1/3 of the present population, if they lived all at a European Union lifestyle level, which only uses about half as many resources as the American lifestyle. This fact alone, unless human society takes strong, intentional, transformative measures, augurs a grim and violent future of people fighting over resources. Let's just consider the impact on the climate. The human burning of fossil fuels is rapidly increasing the concentration of carbon dioxide in the world atmosphere. From 2000 from 270 parts per million before the industrial age to over 414 parts per million now. This doesn't sound like much, but this increasing concentration remains more of the sun's warmth, heating the atmosphere and changing the climate. Since 1800, this rapid anthropogenic climate change has warmed the Earth's surface temperature by almost 1 degree centigrade, or near 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit. Suppose nations rapidly reduce their carbon emissions, getting to global net zero by 2050, a common aim. In that case, we might limit global warming to 1.5 or 2 degrees centigrade by the year 2100. The 2015 Paris Accords secured NDCs, or nationally determined contributions, for each nation for emissions reductions for most countries. Unfortunately, most countries are not progressing rapidly enough to meet their own stated nationally determined contributions. But even if those NDCs were attained, they would not produce enough reductions in carbon emissions to keep global warming below 2 degrees centigrade. According to United Nations projections, if we continue business as usual emissions, the planet will warm 4 or more degrees by 2100. Rapid anthropogenic climate change multiplies and intensifies floods, droughts, hurricanes, wildfires, heat waves, and coastal inundations. The more fossil fuels we burn, the worse the disasters. Coping with these disasters will require more and more of the developed countries' resources, while overwhelming the coping capacities of poorer countries. The only way to stop this intensifying climate catastrophe is to stop burning fossil fuels and get to net zero carbon emissions. That is to radically change the T, or technology factor, by using solar and wind energy, for instance. But we will also need to reduce the affluence or wealthiness factor for the wealthy while increasing it for the poor, and eventually greatly reduce the P, or population factor. The alternative is collective disaster. Climate change is, of course, only one of our multiple environmental transgressions. Still, this one is connected to many others. Thus, how to solve climate change is now the central pressing problem for human society. This admission raises the second subject, comprehending the socio-psychological factors that drive our increasing extraction of resources, production of stuff, consumption of stuff, and dumping of waste, and the factors setting up barriers to our global cooperation to solve this collective problem. Grasping the second subject matter will allow proceeding to the third topic, the practical method of solution. This short essay can only begin to broach these complicated subjects. We can investigate the drivers and barriers at two levels. The social, which refers to forms of collective action and meaning, including institutions, economics, politics, and culture. And on the other hand, the psychological, which refers to forms of individual information processing, evaluation, and decision-making, including rationality and how we assess risks. These two levels are intertwined and affect each other in much debated and still uncertain ways. On the psychological level, it would seem rational for individuals and groups to clearly recognize the looming risks posed by climate change and to try to take effective actions to remove the cause of the problem. However, people are not always so rational. For one thing, climate change poses a global force so massive that many people, feeling helpless, would rather not think about it. They might even deny that climate change exists to avoid cognitive dissonance or mental pain, as Nord shows in Living in Denial. Short of outright denial, other psychological processes could interfere with constructive responses. For instance, people may use decision-making rules that give priority to a single issue at a time, not seeing things in their multiple or future interactions. Such rules tend to highlight more immediate personal concerns, pushing away concerns about climate change. It makes people more likely to leave the status quo as it is, rather than expending energy on future problems and uncertain outcomes. But rationality might not help. An individual focus on the rational pursuit of immediate personal benefits leads to the group overusing the free common property goods like clean air and water. Garrett Hardin recognized this in his idea of the tragedy of the commons, where common property goods tend to be overused. In her book, Governing the Commons, Elinor Ostrom pursued solutions to this tragedy in strengthening collective norms, receiving a Nobel Prize for her discoveries. The need for collective norms to restrain ecological overshoot segues the discussion to the social level, because these collective norms exist among people. On the social level, solutions to global climate change will require strong collective norms that cut consumption by the wealthy while promoting green technology, eliminating carbon emissions, reducing global population, and meeting basic needs. Such norms exist in various forms. They range from formal legal strictures enforced by coercive sanctions, like laws against polluting, to informal, socially reinforced folkways like habits of not littering, and habitual or voluntary enactments where people follow their ideals. Their successful implementation of such norms will require a systematic reorganization of everyday social roles. The results should make a green lifestyle easy and attractive, taking no more effort than falling off a log, as Tim Jackson indicates in Prosperity Without Growth. Many scholars, though, argue that such a social reorganization will not be possible. They argue that contemporary capitalism stands in the way. Capitalism necessarily imposes a demand for high return on investment. Such demands force companies to cut wages and ignore environmental protection, as modeled in Alan Steinberg's treadmill of production. The capitalist system funnels money to owners, increasing economic inequality. The system simultaneously inculcates widespread status-signifying consumption. The wealthy elites push politicians to enact policies that enhance these problems rather than reduce them. In particular, in the U.S., fossil fuel industries fund think tanks to produce propaganda. These organs deny climate change and accuse government policies that foster environmental protection of being socialistic and anti-freedom. Some scholars conclude that the only answer is the elimination of capitalism. However, the modern non-capitalist state socialist economies, such as the Soviet Union and China, what's that?
Huh?
What?
Keep going. I'm just laughing at thinking that the non-capitalist countries are gonna do better.
Right, yeah. These state socialists, such as the Soviet Union and China, have even more severely polluted their environments. Moreover, except for Cuba and North Korea, two highly different versions, these state socialist economies have collapsed and slid into forms of elite-run capitalism, no longer posing as viable alternatives. At the same time, on the positive side, genuine competitive capitalism allows entrepreneurs to invent new products and means of production that respond to or even create new social demands. This destruction of old industries and creation of new ones means that capitalism has some capacity to transform itself. This process can introduce and spread win-win green technology, where it benefits both the company and the environment, as the School of Ecological Modernization contends. Moreover, the rapid emissions reductions in Sweden, Denmark, England, and Germany show that some greening of capitalism is possible. Once they attain sufficient public support for this green transformation, national government policymaking and government processes can tame the worst ecocidal impulses of capitalism. The weakness of global UN governance institutions means that the real action happens at the national and sometimes subnational levels. The International Project on Comparing Climate Change Policy Networks, known as COMPON, operating since 2007, studies and compares the state-society relationships that facilitate or inhibit the green transformation. For instance, the relative political strength of the fossil fuel industry may be a contributing factor in the energy transition, affecting why Germany is more successful than the U.S. Another factor may be the average understanding and approval of science among the population. Many hypotheses along these lines are being developed and tested in the Compound Project. The recently formed Climate Social Science Network pursues much the same goals. One big question concerns the pace of change. Current rates of green transformation are not sufficient to avoid crossing the 2-degree centigrade warming threshold with terrifying consequences. To enact the needed solutions, citizens need both awareness and concern and the means and power to carry out such changes. Intensifying climate change-induced disasters are gradually transforming global awareness. For instance, the Yale Six Americas project shows that the percentage of Americans expressing alarm about global warming, the highest category, has risen from 17% in 2008 to 26% in 2020. At some point, enough people must demand green governmental leadership to transform societies in ways that prevent rapid anthropogenic climate change. Someday, around the world, we must clearly realize that we are all in the same boat, spaceship Earth, and take responsibility to manage it. How bad will the climate disasters have to get before this realization happens? Or will it not happen? Will we continue to emit carbon gases down to the last ton of fossilized fuel, last ton of fossilized coal, as Max Weber said in The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism? This species suicidal outcome is quite possible. As Jared Diamond recounts in his book Collapse, clan competition drove the isolated Easter Islanders to cut down their last tree in order to build giant stone statues. The loss of all their trees cast their society into permanent poverty and severe decline. Will we eventually do the same with our whole planet? The future is in our collective hands. The end.
Hey, that's great. That's great. That's really good. I have many thoughts as it goes by. And the only ones I expressed were, asking you, reminding you, I went, what? Wait a minute, what's HDI? Laughing. And, but it'd be interesting to see, what I think would be interesting to see is if we could get it, like if I had a class, I'd say, all right, your assignment is over the weekend, or if you don't want to have any, your assignment is to write a summary of this. How would you express this? And get people, that makes people think about it, right? Now, I don't have control over people like you do if they're in a class. So I don't know if I can get
I know.
anybody to
I
do
know.
that.
Yeah, right. Well, I don't have that anymore anyhow, either myself.
Right. Um, but yeah, I think it's very clear. You make a lot of really good points. Uh, and so I wanted you to read it and present it, and we'll be thinking about it. Uh,
Okay.
uh,
Well,
yeah,
I really so much appreciate your interest in it and helping spreading it.
yeah. You've been doing, I was telling Katrinka how long you've been at this. Like, wait, a long time.
Yeah,
How long?
it's true.
How long have you been dealing with sociology and environmentalism, and the environment, or that sort of thing?
Well, I mean, I first picked up CERN at Tassajara.
You first
You
picked
know,
up what?
environmental concern about the environment,
At
or a
Tassajara, and you
feeling
were
of
at
the
Tassajara
beauty.
in the '60s. So, uh-huh.
Yeah,
You you were
and
there. You were there at the first practice period
no, I just missed that one. I came in the
in
fall.
the fall. I remember you way back then. Uh,
Yeah.
um, yeah, so that's '67. Uh, but in terms of teaching, uh, well, wait a minute.
Oh,
Tell me. You said you first started thinking about the environment and whatever at Tassar. What do you mean by that specifically?
well, just that, breaking beyond the little city ego, and having feeling this vastness of nature.
Mm-hmm.
While you're sitting there silently and quietly and just feeling the whole vastness of it all.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Uh, when when did you start teaching or writing? Uh, you became a sociology professor. When did you start focusing on the environment, at least somewhat?
Well, around 1978, when I went to do research in Japan on environmental protest movements in Japan.
Yeah.
So I went then and stayed there for 3 years doing that, and then came back and wrote my PhD thesis about that. So it was writing about the interaction between the environment and the local people and polluting factories.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever run into a guy named David Kubiak in Kyoto?
David Kubiak, no.
I did a podcast with him too. Uh, he was very involved he had an environmental organization. He was a very far out guy. He ran for mayor of Kyoto.
He
He's
did.
like from Maine, and he tried to get the referendum entered into Japanese politics. He'd get support from, wealthy Japanese. He started a whole environmental organization, had a lovely office
Wow.
in this uh, on this hill in Kyoto,
Hmm.
in where near, God, I can't remember the name of the area. Really nice, sort of near, not far. You could walk to it from the Philosopher's Walk there in Kyoto.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
and I knew some people who were working there, and I first met him. He was uh, at the flower festival in Nara in 90 or 91 or something, and
Oh, yeah.
he told me to meet him at the press box. It was a giant thing, and he was taking press around to different corporations, pavilions and demonstrations and things, and talking about how they pollute the world and they're destroying, Malaysian rainforests and stuff like that. He's really been quite active in that. So
wonderful.
that's pardon me, that's getting off the point. Let me say one thing about Japanese environmentalism. Tell me if you agree. I went to some environmental meetings, and my Japanese wasn't good like yours. I could talk to people and get by and everything, and I did. But I wasn't good enough to go to that level all in Japanese. But my observation was they had a lot of very strong local groups. They could stop a golf course or do something like that. But this, I've also had Japanese tell me this, but don't have the overall big organizations that are strong like in America, like, Greenpeace and the Sierra Club.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very striking characteristic of their voluntary organization sector,
Yeah.
It's localism.
Yeah.
And the Japanese people don't tend to give donations for, abstract national causes like environmental protection or something. They'll help out with a local project.
Yeah.
Although that was, changed. It may be changing, but
yeah. I remember there was this guy who came to Japan and was trying to convince Japanese logging corporations that were clear-cutting all this forest, tropical forest in Malaysia, that they didn't have to clear-cut a whole acre to get a single tree to make one piece of plywood. I'm exaggerating. And they didn't have to use the plywood one time. They could use it 7 times on like such and such a country does. And the response in the papers was Nihon Takaki, Japan bashing.
Oh.
They didn't pay any attention to what he said. It was just they really don't like to have foreigners come in. I know a woman who did a rather recent tour of Japan with Helen Caldicott, and she translated for her.
Oh, wow.
And people weren't interested in Helen Caldicott. They were interested in what this woman had to say because she was Japanese. She's found that she's more effective just being herself than having like one of the world's foremost authorities on the threat of, radiation and nuclear war and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, it's very, very Japanese-centric.
Yeah.
Consciousness.
Indeed. And so when did you first? I remember putting something on Cuke.com about you teaching about climate change in a sociology class like 10, 20 years ago. How long ago was it? It had to be over 10, 15, 20 years.
Well, I cooked up my first environmental sociology course to teach around 1990.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
That was, after I finished my PhD thesis in 1982 and did some other, teaching and research and stuff.
Yeah.
But that one came around 1990.
Mm-hmm. Well,
yeah.
I think we might have gone over some of this a little bit in your podcast, I'm sure, because we're both old people who repeat ourselves constantly. but and but I remember talking to you quite some time ago, like 10 years ago or something, about you did some sort of course or you had a class wherein one of the things for the class was you talk about the factors in climate denial, and it's not just the like I oversimplified it earlier. It's not just people preferring short-term profit over long-term survival, although that's definitely a factor. There's things like you
Sure.
said libertarians tend to not believe in climate change because the solutions require the libertarians and anarchists. The solutions require action on a big scale by governments and international cooperation and stuff that they're against.
Yeah. It needs to be coordinated that way, and there need to be some rules, and the rules sometimes have to be enforced too.
Yeah, yeah, and right, and also, I think we talked about back then about people having other types of belief systems, religious or political, that it doesn't fit into, and just being stuck in, believing stuff.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. There's a lot of beliefs out there that don't compute with climate change.
Yeah. And one thing people do to discredit science is they point at places where science was wrong. Well, everything's always wrong and evolving. And the thing about science is that nothing is holy. It can always, I know it gets that way, and scientists of course, get attached to looking at things particular ways, and sometimes they have to have their fingers pried from some person in the future that shows, well, like Einstein said. He said, I didn't discredit Newton. I just showed, if we look at it from another point of view with a bigger picture, his physics no longer works there. And he said people will come along in the future and do the same to, what I've come up with.
Yeah, right, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But people find like individual exceptions,
Yeah, yeah.
And to them that looms very large.
Oh yeah, and the mass, so many people will just glom on to, like you say, individual exceptions. Boy, I hear that. Yeah, but what about so and so? And like
right.
they do to Fauci, right? Poor Fauci.
Yeah, right. Right. Some people believe that Fauci's, invented the vaccine or something. I mean,
invented the COVID-19, right? Oh, I know people here that believe crap like that. Yeah. Not locals, expats here. I met one Indonesian guy who thought Hillary Clinton was head of a big pederast ring.
Oh my God!
Yeah, and it was after a meditation retreat, a 1-week meditation retreat, and he was going on about. And I went, wow.
Oh no!
Yeah, and he was a bright guy. He was a bright guy.
Oh yeah, some very bright people.
Yeah,
believe very weird things.
Disinformation, man, is powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's strange why they glom on to certain, fantastic beliefs.
Right, and also just the things like vilifying Bill Gates, who has, it's just he's been such a great example of what somebody who has excess wealth, more than they should have, as far as I'm concerned, what they can do with it. He's trying as hard as he can to benefit the entire human race. And he just gets attacked. Not just, but he does get attacked.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Some very intelligent people think he's part of the billionaire cabal that's ruling the planet.
Yeah. 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 All right. Well,
yeah.
So I'm a firm believer in science, and I think all this crap about and the media really they don't help. Jesus, they think science versus religion. Is it science or religion? Or is it faith?
Yeah.
Well, no, they'll say faith or science. God, science is not in conflict with anything that's true, as far as I'm concerned. It's impossible.
Good point.
Impossible. Science isn't some fixed thing, and neither is truth. Well, relative truth, anyway. Okay, that's fun.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, you too.
It's been great fun to talk to you.
Yeah, that was good. That was good. All right. Well, you take care.
Some great. You take care too.
Stay in touch.
Okay, we'll stay in touch.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you for all you do.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So thanks a lot, Jeff Broadbent. Yeah. And good luck to all of us in this changing, warming world. This has been a Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC, Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, preserving the legacy of Shunryu Suzuki and those whose paths crossed his, and anything else that comes to mind. We're coming to you from sleepy Sanur with Dogette Bandita, Feline Cuchita, and dear lovely Katrinka, and we're wishing you and yours and all of us a grand awakening.